Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to speak on the Clause 2, the commencement date clause. I want to pick up a theme that my colleague Trevor Mallard was talking about in his contribution, and that's the question about whether this bill actually should be backdated. Sorry, Clark Kent on Brotown? No, Mr Bridges. No, this is about whether the commencement date should in fact be a retrospective date. And the reason I raise that, Mr Chair, is because if there's a problem here in terms of our industrial law, it's a problem that's existed for a very long time. It hasn't just existed now, and as has been mentioned already in the debate, this is a result of the case that went to the Employment Court in the name of Mr Bryson, and that case has been discussed a number of times. But if this government is seriously suggesting that there is some major issue in the film industry that needs resolving, it is the same issue that's existed since 2005. Since 2005, when the law in this area was settled. So, Mr Chair, that is a justification, I believe, for an amendment to the commencement date, if we're taking the National Party at their word, to backdate the legislation to 2005. And it's important in the context of what commencement date we might have to look at what really was the outcome from that case. And it did settle, and I think this is a very important thing that came out of the judgment from the Supreme Court. The nature of the employment relationship depends on what the parties intend and agree, but also on what they do and how they conduct themselves. Now, that was the settled conclusion from that particular case. And I think it's important to note that it's not just a simple matter of choice, as Mr Hayes and others have interjected across the House tonight, but this is actually a matter of quite important employment law that was settled as far as most people in New Zealand were concerned in 2005, and that would be a justification if the National Party was following its own logic here, Mr Chair, for backdating this commencement date. Because at that point we had a settled piece of law, and subsequent to that time movies have been made in New Zealand under that particular provision. Very big movies. Avatar, for instance, the movie about the blue-greens, Nick Smith's movie, Avatar, that was made after this settled piece of law. And then, therefore, if the National Party's logic is to be followed, the commencement date should be backdated. Because the problem for the National Party is that there is no logic, though. There is no logic to follow about when the commencement date comes in, because the commencement date should follow that, but it's unnecessary. It doesn't need to commence, Mr Chair, because the law in this area has been settled, movies have been made, and people have got on with the job. And so a backdated commencement date would make sense in the context of a problem, an imagined problem in this case, but a problem that somehow or other the National Party is looking to solve. So there would be, if we follow the National Party's logic, a case for a backdated commencement date. But, Mr Chair, I don't believe that there is that case. I believe that the fact that this bill is to come into force immediately after it receives royal assent is actually the National Party trying to get rid of this issue, because they know they've dug themselves into a hole that requires them to have a quick commencement date right away after this. They've dug themselves into a hole. Mr Hayes says that they haven't dug themselves into a hole. But they have actually done that here, because the National Party didn't follow this through. And in fact, another reason for backdating the commencement date, Mr Chair, is actually the enormous amount of work that has gone into The Hobbit in Wellington over a long period of time. And in fact, if there was a problem here, it's already existing for the work on The Hobbit. So another reason that the National Party, if they were following their own logic, would backdate the bill. But the problem is, Mr Chair, that the bill should not commence at all as an act, because as a piece of legislation, it is simply the National Party addressing a problem that doesn't exist, created by a crisis of their own making. That's essentially what we've got here today, and the National Party can't decide whether or not this was something that is forced on them by Warner Brothers or something that they're doing of their own volition. If they're doing it of their own volition, Mr Chair, then it should be backdated. That's the truth of it. If they're doing it of their own volition, if this was a problem in industrial law, then it's been a problem since 2005 and it should have been backdated. But Mr Chair, if it is in fact something that's been forced on this government by Warner Brothers, if this is in fact the government rolling over and saying, yes, we'll do whatever Warner Brothers want, well then maybe a commencement date in the future is somehow or other allowable. But unfortunately, Mr Chair, what we are seeing in this House tonight is yet another bill being rammed through urgency.
Call John Hayes.
I move that the question be now put.
I call